One of the most certain facts about Jesus' life has to do with his death. On the basis of a rigorous historical analysis, there can't be really any question at all. Jesus was crucified on orders of Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. He was crucified for making a political claim to be the king of the Jews. That's the charge brought up at the trial. That's what's written on the placard over his head at the crucifixion. It's the reason they crucified him. If somebody claims to be a rival king, rival to Rome, then the Romans simply killed him publicly in a very painful way. They crucified him. And so there is little doubt that that's the charge brought against Jesus, is that he's calling himself the king of the Jews, which in Jewish circles, the way you call yourself the future king is you call yourself the Messiah. The term Messiah for Jews referred to the one who was anointed by God to be the future ruler. The Hebrew word Mashiach, Messiah, literally means anointed one. The king is anointed to be king. Jesus is claiming to be the future king. Pilate hears of it, has him crucified. So there's no doubt about that. In the Gospels, after Jesus is crucified, he's buried by Joseph of Arimathea. And 3 days later, on the third day, some women come to the tomb, find that it's empty, and they come to believe that he's been raised from the dead. My view about this is that we're sure about the crucifixion. I don't think we can be sure that he was buried by Joseph of Arimathea. The Roman policies were not to allow crucified criminals to be buried decently. As part of the humiliation, they let them decay on the cross to be subject to wild scavengers. It's almost impossible for us to believe that Jesus could possibly have been left on the cross. But that's what the Romans did with virtually everybody else of the many, many, many thousands of people they crucified. And so I don't think they made an exception because they knew that Jesus was the Son of God. And so, maybe they made an exception, but it seems unlikely. Why then do you have these stories about Jesus being buried? Because 40 years later, and even before that, Christians who are telling the stories know that he has to be raised from the dead. There can't be an empty tomb unless there's a tomb. And so he has to be buried. My suspicion is that Christians came up with the story of the burial. My further suspicion is that nobody came to believe that Jesus was raised from the dead because they knew about an empty tomb. In the New Testament, when anybody finds an empty tomb, they don't think Jesus has been raised from the dead. They're confused. They don't understand. And that makes sense. I mean, if you put somebody in a tomb and you come back 3 days later and the tomb's empty, your first thought is not, oh, he's been exalted to heaven as sitting at the right hand of the Father. Your first thought is grave robbers. Or you think, hey, I'm at the wrong tomb here. And so the empty tomb doesn't convince anybody. In the Gospels, what convinces people is they have visions of Jesus. They see him alive afterwards. And I think that's why the early Christians started believing in Jesus, is because some of Jesus' followers said they saw him. And that convinced people, and it started the resurrection belief, which began Christianity.